Sunderers and Ants are some of the most versatile vehicles in Planetside. They can go from offering a deployment option so your faction can assault a base, to becoming a fearsome battle vehicle. Or in the case of an Ant, it can build player bases that can be used for any number of reasons, but it all depends on what you want it to do. Today, I would like to talk about 3 very important loadouts for your Sunderer, as well as 3 for your Ant, and how to best use them. This isn't to say that these are the only loadouts you should use, just the ones most important for both spawn options as well as for plowing through enemy armor. I'll be starting with Sunderers and then moving on to Ants. Part 1. Deployment Shield. The Deployment Shield Sunderer is what you have unlocked when you first start playing. This isn't to say it's completely done being upgraded though. When you use the first level of the Deployment Shield, it takes 10 seconds for the shield to start regenerating after taking damage, but you can reduce that time to 6 seconds by fully upgrading it. This will take 800 certs to do though, so while you're saving up for those upgrades, you can start on the others. For the utility, I recommend using the Gate Shield Diffuser so that you can easily get into any base that has a shield covering the road. The GSD lasts for 15 seconds and takes 55 seconds to recharge, but only 45 seconds at max level. It's also a good option for plowing through any incoming vehicles since it also negates any collision damage, letting you ram into anything without taking damage. To upgrade your GSD, it will take 1,200 certs, however I find that the first level is fine enough for me since you rarely need to decrease the recharge time. For your chassis, I recommend using the Racer chassis, not only because of the increase in speed, but also Racer can turn at similar rates as the rival chassis as long as you know how to power slide. For those of you who haven't heard of power sliding, what you do is hold your spacebar as you turn. Just make sure you also hold W while doing it or you'll lose momentum instead of keeping it. To max out your Racer chassis, it will take 700 certs, but I recommend upgrading this all the way first since it's the most useful, especially for other loadouts. For anyone looking to use their Sunderer for forward spawn options, I recommend using this in most cases. While there are uses for the Cloaked Sunderer, the Deployment Shield lets the Sunderer survive for longer, even through an orbital strike, letting your allies respond to any threats that come to destroy their spawn option before that option is destroyed. The drawback is that it takes a full 2,700 certs to max out all of its equipment. Luckily, if you find a good place to park, then you'll be printing certs with how many people will spawn at your bus. Part 2. Stealth. While the Deployment Shield Sunderer is very useful, there are times when a glowing vehicle isn't discreet enough for a spawn option. This is where your Stealth Sunderer, also called a Cloaked Sunderer, comes into play. For every upgrade to your stealth, it decreases the range where enemy maps will automatically show where you are as you drive. Once you buy the 4th upgrade, it makes it so that enemies will not see you on the map no matter how close you are to them. This is broken by being spotted with Q though. But the 5th and final upgrade to your stealth will also give your Sunderer a cloaking field when you deploy. But to get there, it costs a whopping 2,330 certs, with both of the last upgrades costing 1,000 each. While this option is great for hidden deploy areas, it suffers from having less health than a blockade armor Sunderer, and it doesn't gain a deployment shield, so it's easier to destroy a Cloaked Sunderer than those 2 options. Because of this, you shouldn't park it somewhere where people will expect to see a Sunderer. For example, under the air pads at a biolab is one of the worst places for a Cloaked Sunderer, but it's usually where you'll see one. So save places that are checked frequently for Deployment Shield Sunderers and park your Stealth Sunderer somewhere hidden, even if it's a little further away. Because you suffer from having less armor and no shield, I recommend using your fire suppression for this loadout. This will increase your survivability, especially if a lightning decides to fire at you before your friendly armor pieces while you're driving. To upgrade it all the way, which I do recommend especially for the last Sunderer loadout I will be talking about, it will cost 800 certs. And for your chassis, you should grab the Racer chassis to help you get from base to base faster. If this is the first loadout you're making for your Sunderer, it will cost you 3,830 certs. This one is definitely the most expensive, with just the vehicle stealth costing almost as much as my recommended Deployment Shield loadout. But you need to remember, out of the 3 loadouts I'm talking about, this is the easiest to kill. I know I said this earlier, but make sure you park it in a spot where either no one will check it, or that's hard to get to. Both of these will require you to learn more about the map, especially how far people are willing to walk to get to a point room, and where you need to worry about someone following a line of people spawning from your vehicle. Part 3. Battle Bus. Out of today's 3 Sunderer loadouts, this is my favorite by far. No matter if I'm driving or gunning for it, I just have fun the entire time. For this loadout, you need to be very aggressive, which requires armor, so go for the blockade armor, which costs 1,350 certs total. This gives you an additional 1,000 health, but also makes you 40% more resistant to C4. If you have the fail sauce horn, make sure you use it here just to mock the poor C4 fairies who think they can get an easy kill off of you. For your utility, I recommend using the fire suppression. Like I said earlier, it only costs 800 certs to max out, and lets you survive for longer during combat, which you will be seeing a lot of in this loadout. And for your chassis, you can probably guess what it is. Racer chassis to help you get around faster. You also get bonus points for making your battle bus look either cool or ridiculous. What do those points do? It doesn't really matter, does it? To max out this loadout, it will cost you 2,850 certs, only 150 more than the deployment shield loadout. However, that's not all you need to worry about with this loadout. You also need guns. For your battle bus, I actually recommend stepping away from the basilisks as quickly as possible. Instead, you should focus on getting the walker, ranger, and your faction-specific gun. That's the palisade for the TR, trawler for the NC, pariah for the VS, and HCG for the NSO. The bad news for these guns is that you need to buy each one twice, once for the front gun and once for the back gun. The good news is that you only need to buy one walker and one ranger, preferably one for the front and one for the back. So while just getting the Empire-specific guns costs 1,750 certs total, you don't need to spend 1,750 for just the walkers or just rangers. After you buy each of your guns, you need to upgrade them. For this, I recommend buying the magazine size and ammo capacity upgrades, which costs 4,400 certs for each gun. I also recommend buying each upgrade in sets. If you buy the 500 cert upgrade to the magazine size for one of your trawlers, your next upgrade should be the 500 cert upgrade to the magazine size on your other trawler. But how do you use a battle bus? While it can be deployed at a base for a spawn option at the beginning of the fight, this Sunderer loadout should be actively in the fight, so don't rely on it as your parked spawn option. If you do want to use it for spawning though, it makes a great mobile spawn platform for your squad, but you're stuck with the loadout you spawned in with. Now for your driver and gunners, you should rely on some of the information I talked about in my vehicle basics video, especially when it comes to your driver loadout and gunner loadouts. And the gunners need to remember to look around as you drive. This will help avoid being destroyed by enemy vehicles either in the air or on the ground. During combat, the gunners should remember to fire on priority targets. This means tanks firing at you and are already weakened. If both gunners fire on one target, it makes that target die a lot faster. The driver shouldn't be staying still either. While this loadout does work as a spawn option if you park, the driver and gunners should remain in the vehicle unless they're repairing. This is so you can get out of any situation quickly, or just let other Sunderers park, letting the fight continue. One very effective weapon for this loadout is to actually use the vehicle itself. If you go full speed into a lightning that's moving towards you, you can take out about 70% of its health. If your gunners were firing at it, then it just dies, no questions asked. And if it survived and you're able to keep pushing it into a wall, you might be able to destroy it by crushing it. Part 4. Deliverer. Now we get to move on to the Ant, which is probably the most versatile vehicle in the game. For those of you that don't drive them frequently enough, the Ant can be summed up as half a Sunderer. It fits 4 people, has 1 gun, and can be used as a spawn option with the Deliverer module, which is what I'll be starting out with. The Deliverer module gives your Ant the ability to act as a forward spawn. This is kind of broken since it still has the larger no deploy zone of other Ants, but it does let you leave a spawn point in very unusual areas. It also lets you resupply ammo to nearby vehicles, with the range increasing from 12 meters to 20 meters at its final upgrade. The Deliverer costs 1,850 certs to fully upgrade, but it can be essential for an armor column due to its maneuverability and ramming potential, as well as acting as a forward spawn for squad members or for anyone as long as it's deployed. Speaking of ramming potential, you want to capitalize on this by giving it both the turbo utility, which the total cost is 2,250 certs, and the racer chassis, which costs 700 certs. It might be a little hard to control when you first use it, but with some practice, you'll be running circles around your enemies. One thing to note though is that the turbo burns through a lot of cordium when you first get it, costing 250 per second, but it only costs 150 per second at the final stage, letting you use your turbo for a little more than a minute. Overall, this loadout costs 4,800 certs, which sounds hard to get, but if you have any of the construction items unlocked, it makes it easier, if you're not used to infantry or vehicle combat. This is one of the 2 loadouts I recommend for what I call a battle ant. Another name for it you might have heard is the term soldier ant. I'll go a little more into how to drive a battle ant after talking about the next loadout. Part 5. Stealth. For the other battle ant loadout, you actually want essentially the same thing as the deliverer ant, just replace your defense slot with stealth. Again, that's turbo utility, costing 2,250, racer chassis costing 700, and stealth, which costs 1,330. With a total cost of 4,280 certs, it's a little cheaper than the deliverer loadout, but still a lot more than what some people are willing to go for. So why use it at all? Again, when leveling up, vehicle stealth decreases the range where you show up on enemy maps naturally, unless you're spotted. but when it reaches its max rank, it makes it so you can drive right next to an enemy and you won't show up on their minimap. I also mentioned this was a battle ant loadout, but this is also the loadout you want to use when you're working on any construction. It allows you to get into places that are harder to get any other vehicles into, giving you a natural defense. If you do use it for construction though, try getting a good camo that will help hide you. I prefer the Absolute Zero camo from the 2022 Christmas event, but a good one that you can buy is the Dark Digital camo. Now that I've told you the two battle ant loadouts, how do you use them? Well, the ant is surprisingly good at ramming into enemies, and if you use your turbo, it deals even more damage. Or if you hit a vehicle correctly, you can even flip enemy tanks. Bonus points if you blast an obnoxious horn after doing this. But you need a gun. I recommend using the Walker or Ranger for most situations, including base building. Or you can choose your faction-specific Basilisk variant or a Bulldog. You can even use the Fury if your gunner prefers it though. Now should you choose Deliverer or Stealth? That all depends on what you're doing. If you're in an armor column, I recommend Deliverer. If you're either running solo or in a small squad, you should go for Stealth. And how do you drive the ant when you're out of combat? The ant is naturally a great climber, and with the Racer chassis, this is amplified. And anything you struggle to climb with that combination can't stop the turbo from letting you up. Essentially, you want to drive anywhere except the roads, because those are checked more than any other place by other vehicles. And with the ant's great climbing abilities, you can either use it to sneak up on an enemy, or to act as a spotter or roamer. If you want to use it for attacking from unexpected angles, you should typically try climbing cliffs where the enemy doesn't see you, dropping down behind them and then ramming them from behind. With this, you can deal massive damage, sometimes even destroying the enemy vehicle, or you can push them out of their cover, letting your friendly tanks deal with the vehicle. If you want to be a roamer, a good tactic is to drive along the sides of mountains. Like I said in my infantry basics video, people don't typically look up. You can even drive right by some passing enemy aircraft and they might not notice you, because no one expects to see an ant driving along a random cliff face. Just be careful with this tactic, because it's easy to fall down. And while the ant is great when it rolls over, because 9 times out of 10 it rolls onto its wheels, it can still die from falling. One thing to try with a battle ant is dodging tank shells. While it's not always effective, try using your power slide with small taps of your turbo while driving away from enemies, and they're likely to miss their shots. But this might make people decide to change targets to something that's actually shooting back. Part 6. Bullet Catcher. While the battle ant can be used to attack from unexpected directions, or even just throw itself into an enemy and then run away, sometimes it's better if you have something to distract your enemy while someone else shoots them. For this, I recommend what I call a bullet catcher. This is an idea I had before I actually started practicing with the Magrider. Basically, whenever I was in an armor column with my Magrider, I felt kinda useless. I didn't have the training, experience, or skill to use the Magrider, so I chose the loudest color possible and gave that camo, the High Seas camo, to my Magrider. I like to call this loadout the Blueberry, because of how easy it is to see the High Seas camo that I chose. If you use this same tactic with an ant, it looks something like this. You want to be able to take damage without worrying. For this, you want the reinforced armor, giving you 10% more health. This only costs 100 certs too, making it the cheapest item in the video. Then you want the Sea Barrier utility, which reduces damage received by 30%, which the cost of this is a total of 850 certs to max out. For your chassis, I've had people recommend the Rival chassis, which would be another 700 certs, but since I'm so used to using the Racer chassis, I use that. Overall, the cost of this one is 1,650 certs, the cheapest loadout in today's video. But it doesn't end there. You want to essentially make this the brightest vehicle in the game, so pimp out that ride and force the enemy factions to admire it. You can do this with any camo you like, however, you need to remember it's supposed to stand out, so something white on Esamir would be a bad idea. Also, cosmetics aren't necessary if you don't want to spend money on the game. I just find that people are more willing to shoot at the bright blue box than the dark gray one right next to it. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new today. Something to remember though is that you're a lot less effective at combat if you don't have any gunners, especially for a Sunderer. Not as much for an ant due to its ability to ram and potentially flip enemy vehicles, but you will still lose effectiveness. As always, if you either learned something or would like to correct me, feel free to leave a comment on what it was. If you liked the video, make sure you leave a like, and remember to subscribe for more videos like this.